So hello and welcome to our webinar for today on how can social protection programs protect women's right to work. This webinar is organized by the German Development Corporation through the program Global Alliances for Social Protection, which is implemented by the German International Corporation, better known as GIZ. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So my name is Derr, and I'm a technical advisor and regional coordinator for Africa at the Global Alliances for Social Protection program, and I'm based in our regional office in Pretoria in South Africa. And I will be your host for today. So next slide, please. Our speaker for today will be Professor Hania Sholkamy, who I will introduce just now. But first of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you, Hania. Glad to have you.
I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you very much. So about Hania. Hania is an Egyptian anthropologist, a feminist and an activist with a PhD from the London School of Economics and political sciences of the University of London. She obtained her bachelor's and master's from the American University in Cairo, the AUC, and she is currently an associate research professor at the Social Research Center of the AUC. She has spent a decade working on social protection issues and has designed and piloted the cash transfers programs of the government of Egypt in her capacity as a special advisor to the Ministry of Social Solidarity. She's a proponent of feminist social protection and has lobbied for the right of women to receive welfare and pensions in their own right and not as dependents. She was also regional coordinator of the Pathways to Women's Empowerment Research Consortium in partnership with the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex in the United Kingdom. Prior to her current position, she was served as an assistant professor of anthropology in the Department of Sociology, Anthropology and Egyptology at AUC and worked as a research associate at the International Population Council and was the Ioma Evans Pritchard Junior Research Fellow at the St. Anne's College of Oxford University. Once again, welcome, and we are looking forward to your insights, Hania.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So let me take you through the agenda of today. First of all, I would like to briefly introduce the Global Alliances for Social Protection program of GIZ and also to put today's webinar into the context of our work. Then Hania will take over and will start with a story from Egypt, which is very exciting. And we will then move to setting the scene, first of all, and discuss what does gender actually mean, and then move to the gender-sensitive design of public works programs, with the MGNREGA program of India as an example. Please note, we will have a short Q&A break after this first part of the presentation, so please use the chat bar. I think it's located on your right-hand side, to post your questions right from the start. In the second part, we will mainly talk about the findings of an impact study or impact assessment of Egypt's conditional cash transfer program, which will also be followed by a Q&A session and a discussion. So also there, please just do post your questions as we go so we can collect them right in time. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So our program, the Global Alliances for Social Protection program of the German International Corporation known as GIZ. Just to give you some context why we are organizing the event today. What we are doing at the Global Alliances for Social Protection program is that we address emerging economies and other interested countries which are currently undergoing major social protection reforms. And as we see patterns of reforms globally, the idea is to create like peer-to-peer networks and connections for exchange between these countries. So challenges from the field can be jointly discussed by the countries, and respective solutions can be developed and shared. Within our program, we have multiple work streams on a variety of topics, as social protection is really a very broad like definition. And one of them, our work streams, is related to productive inclusion, which directly also obviously relates to public employment, better known as public work programs. So we at the Global Alliances for Social Protection program, we think it's very important to also look on how social protection systems, and in our case today, public work programs as part of the system, can be designed in a gender-sensitive way. And this is why we set up this webinar today, to gain a better understanding of how this can be done. And we are very grateful that Hania took the time to be with us today to enlighten us about that. Next slide, please. So which questions do we want to answer, or in another way, like what are our objectives of today? So this webinar is supposed to engage with the specificities of women's social protection needs by examining work as a tool for poverty alleviation. And the webinar will attempt to answer the following question, like what are the gender-specific design features that ensure that efficiency and sustainability of social protection programs that provide transfer through work? So this webinar will use 3 tools presented by Hania that are supposed to answer these questions, and they are the following. It's a theoretical knowledge. First of all, it's to set the scene, as I said earlier, to get an understanding of the theoretical knowledge on gender awareness and transformative social protection. The second tool is like the on-the-ground experience that has been gained by public work programs, especially the one in India, the MJ in Riga. And in the third step, we would like to, as I mentioned before, like look at the impact assessment of a successful social protection program in Egypt, which has actually found, which is surprising, and Hania will go more into depth about that, like that the impact on gender empowerment was well under anticipated as expected. Yeah, and with this, I'm happy to hand over to Hania Sholkamy to like talk from her experiences and from her knowledge. So Hania, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Leah. Thank you for all of you joining. Can we have the next slide, please? My first slide is a story. I won't read it out to you. I'll give you a bit of time to read it, but it helps us appreciate that women and men lead multidimensional, complex lives, where their backgrounds, life trajectories, contexts, and character intersect and sometimes collide. So in front of you is a true story of an Egyptian woman who has a skill. She's a welder. She's unable to use this skill to enter a difficult, very pro-men or patriarchal labor market. She has married multiple times. She has older children. She has younger children. Her daughters want to get married. She has borrowed money. She has fallen into debt. She has tried to apply for a cash transfers program. And the story in front of you really illustrates my first point, which is that designing social protection programs is a complex task, because social protection programs need to alleviate specific burdens using generic and tested tools, so that each one of our beneficiaries, of the people we work with, has a unique set of conditions that create vulnerability and need, and is not a unidimensional being. Sometimes we see the poor only through the lens of poverty. Next slide, please. And one of those specificities, those things that make each one of us unique, is how we experience our gender. And I think it's important to keep in mind that gender operates differently in different settings. So gender is not a simple or static category defined by being male or female. In fact, in one source, it's a quote I'm quite fond of. It's about how gender saturates political relationships and the subjective identities of all political actors. So gender seeps into our very fiber. And here the word political actor and political relationships is about how we engage with the public sphere. So that means that gender considerations and gender subjectivities, so how our society defines our rights as men and women, and how we experience our sexuality and social roles, is important for our understanding of the viability of a social protection program. Will this program meet its intended outcomes? The impact of the program, so even if it does meet these outcomes, how does it change people's social lives? The risks and obstacles that face a program, these obstacles may be to do with culture, maybe to do with religion, maybe to do with society, economics, personal issues, and the limitations and potentials of programs. And without understanding this specificity, and this specificity cannot be understood only with reference to literature or to theory. It has to be understood in context. We cannot make our programs succeed. Next slide, please. So, just a reminder of what is gender-aware social protection in general, whether a public works program or any other program. It's a program that is designed to be responsive to inequalities. This is gender is one of those inequalities that is a key to multidimensional sources of vulnerability. So we need to understand how the inequality itself is structured. It's the economy, it's the society, what kinds of relationships create gender inequality. And then we also need to understand what are the implications of this inequality. And through our design, try to understand how vulnerabilities are mediated. By that word, I mean how they operate. And finally, it aims to tackle these vulnerabilities and to promote empowerment. So that to achieve gender responsive social protection, we need to understand the nature of the inequality and address it, and understand how it's embedded. We need to understand how it operates, so how it's experienced, how people experience these vulnerabilities, and not only try to mitigate them, but to transform the underlying assumptions, the underlying conditions that create this inequality. So as you can see, it's a pretty tall order. Next slide, please. Now, it's important to remember also that gender operates differently over the life cycle. And this again is from the work of Rebecca Holmes. So age, race, and ability create or compound vulnerability. It is being a young girl entails a different set of vulnerabilities from being a young boy. Being an older woman, completely different experience. And I know that this is somewhat evident, but it's sometimes important to remember this when we're designing social protection programs, that each age, each phase in one's life carries within it the seeds of a variety of distinct risks. So gender-based violence across the life cycle, for example, is more sexualized for our fertile years. It's more criminalized for older, it's delinked from our sexual beings in our older phase. So an elderly woman will experience a different kind of violence than a younger woman. And of course, the differences in labor force participation and earnings in old age is very important, because it's not only that our age affects us, our ability to work, but it also affects our desirability as participants in the labor market. And gender segregated labor markets are really complex, made more complex by broader problems in labor markets themselves, broader problems in the nature of work, the need for work, the value of work. Next slide, please. So public and other works program require an awareness of what it is like to be a woman, a girl, a mother, an individual, or a family member in a community. And this awareness must be grounded in empirical evidence and in a rights-based approach that privileges the substantive meaning of justice and equality. And here, this is really a summation of my talk. But what it means, if you think of the components of this rather long couple of sentences, it means we have to understand, we have to be relevant to how people experience their vulnerabilities. We have to understand not only the nature of gender or of being a woman, but what it means to be a man. And we have to understand the communities in which we work. And that this awareness has to come from the ground, not from theory, that is also coupled with an absolute commitment to alleviating or changing these power imbalances. Next slide, please. So if we get more specific now, as you're all participants, I think you have probably excellent, better than my own experience in social protection. But it's important to remember that using work as a tool to extend welfare or support to people who need them takes a variety of forms. So there are guaranteed work programs, for example. This is where an agent, an NGO, a state, a program, a donor creates programs where people are given work and it's guaranteed. There are other work programs which are a little bit different. They're designed to address a specific area or situation. So, for example, Bangladesh's programs that enable women to work on roads after floods, or the kind of work programs that avail people to work for a specific in a specific area or in a specific sector or for a specific situation. Unemployment insurance is another form of work-related social protection, except here we are enabling people to find work. Then there are unconditional income support triggered by age or retirement. So this is where you are providing a person with income support because they cannot earn their own enough to sustain themselves. And these may be triggered by age or retirement or by poverty. There is conditional income support, which enables people to continue to work as well, but conditioned on certain behaviors for children. Then there are skills and human resource development through subsidies and services. And this is where you provide training, subsidies that enable people to access skills development, to transfer from one sector to the other. And there are employment regulation programs, such as minimum wage, for example. Now, the conditional and unconditional income support, it's important to remember that they're not irrelevant to work, because they are another way of enabling people to work by supporting them. And for the unconditional income support triggered by age or retirement, it is really to compensate people who have been working, and we assume that they have been working, but have been unable to create enough savings. So as you can see, some of these programs have a direct effect, such as work programs that provide work. Others have a delayed effect on employment, as they enable people to develop the skills they need to work, or to have income while they look for work, or to invest in the health and education of their children, who in turn will have better opportunities for employment. And just a final word to remember that work is the way we alleviate everyone's hardship or access to welfare, because we assume that we all should and need to work. Next slide, please. So the question here is, for this webinar, is how can we make work programs in general work for women? What have you learned from your own experiences and contexts and programs? And this maybe could be a subject for us to discuss in the Q&A. And because we come from different contexts, I assume, and we need to think of how the following factors, this long list, determines women's access to and benefits from social protection through work programs. So this is just a long list of factors: age, education, the politics of culture that determines status and standing, sexuality and health, maternal health. Maybe one of the things, the silent injustices for a lot of women who are not in formal employment, is that they have little access to maternal benefits. That means access to healthcare or income while they are pregnant or when they have a baby. Motherhood itself is a factor that can compound vulnerability with the responsibilities of reproductive responsibilities. Access to public space and mobility. Can women go out freely? Can they access areas where there is work? Access to financial tools. This can be as simple as, where do I save my income? Do I have access to digital money? Do I have access to a safe place? Do I have access to borrowing, using my money as collateral? Safety and security, of course, very self-evident, and care responsibilities. Because care responsibilities are not only reproductive. I may have to care for a neighbor, I may have to care for an older family member, and of course all of these things are relevant to men as well, but in different ways. And of course these things are relevant in all societies and in all communities, but also they operate differently in different contexts. Next slide, please. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about the flagship of all public works programs. And it's important to remember that it's a flagship, not because it's the first public works program in the world, but actually because it's a public works program that has consolidated a number of different programs and fortified them, empowered these public works programs with an act of parliament. So it's the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. And that's the first thing I think it's important to remember, that this program, launched in 2005 by the Ministry of Rural Development, builds upon other existing programs. and was enabled or empowered by two important acts of parliament. One is the act itself that institutionalized this program, which guarantees 100 days of government of employment to rural households below the poverty line. But it was also, next slide please, much served by a Right to Information Act that was passed around the same time. So households enrolled in the MNREGA scheme receive a job card to ensure documentation of their application for work and ensure timely processing. Most of the work secured through the MNREGA schemes involves physical, unskilled labor and is often related to water retention, irrigation, storage, road building, and other publicly useful projects that are determined at the council level. Now, women's employment is a focal point in this program, and it wasn't from the onset, but it became one of the distinguishing features of this program. It has a requirement that 1/3 of the beneficiaries employed through this initiative must be women. The actual figure may be a bit less, but the intention is there. And in other ways has tried to ensure that its design accommodates the needs, addresses the burdens of rural women living under the poverty line. It tries to understand what disempowers these women and then tries to accommodate. And there are, in fact, 4 features that empower women in this program. So it's not just about access. It's not just about saying one third of the jobs or 1/2 of the jobs have to go to women. It's at a deeper level that this program operates. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? Yes. So the most obvious level is at the level of securing access and reasonable working conditions. Okay. So it says women have to be there, but to support women's participation, for example, creche facilities are to be provided by the implementing agency when 5 or more children below the age of 6 are brought to the work site. So it says for each council or whoever the implementing agency is in different states, that if there are women who have children and these children come up to more than 5, then a creche facility has to be made available. And that women, especially single women, are given preference to work on work sites close to their residence if the work site is 5 kilometers or more away. So these are 2 features that enable women to come and take these jobs. If they have children, there is a creche facility, and if they are single, or if regardless of their reproductive status, they are ensured that they are provided jobs that are close to where they live. So as you can see, these design features address women's care burdens. If you go back to the list we had, care burdens, motherhood responsibilities, safety and security, mobility. These features of as they operate in these different village societies have informed this design. Next slide, please. But then there is another level, and that is the level of wages and access to financial services. The Act states that equal wages are to be paid to men and women workers under the provisions of Equal Remuneration Act of 1976. And as many of you are probably following, this issue of equality, operates in different ways. There is that guaranteeing equal wages, but there's also guaranteeing access to similar jobs. And this is an important measure given prevailing wage disparities, particularly in rural sector between men and women. But the guidelines also suggest that when opening bank accounts for the laborers, the bank or the panchayat, that's the councils, need to give a considered choice between individual accounts for each laborer and joint accounts. This is an interesting feature. Joint accounts, if there is a man and a woman who have access to these jobs and they want to open an account, is it in the name of the husband or the wife? This feature says they should be co-signatories. Special care should be taken to avoid crediting household earnings to individual accounts held by the male household head, which would leave women with no control over their earnings. So this is a feature informed by issues of gender disparities, gender roles in the household, male headship, giving women access to their earnings and giving them access to ways to save and spend, save their earnings, protect them, and spend. Third slide, please. Next slide, please. Then there's another level where gender disparity can operate, and that is the relations within the workplace. So for the supervision of work and recording worksite attendance, recording worksite attendance is a very powerful role. All work requires the designation of responsible supervisors or mates. The guidelines suggest that adequate representation of women among mates should be ensured. So this is work that is availed to slightly more or better educated women in positions of hierarchy, ensuring that these workplace supervisors, that there is gender parity in these amongst these workplace supervisors. And as you can imagine, usually gender gaps or gender discrimination or the gender wage pay gap is not just about differences in wages, it's also about access to senior jobs. And here we are seeing a conscious effort being made to ensure that the seniors are men and women, not just men supervising women. Next slide, please. Okay. And fourth, there is the issue of voice or decision making. The work sites, this whole program has an intricate structure of committees and audit processes and at the state and central level. So there are local vigilance and monitoring committees which monitor the program, the progress and quality of work while it is underway. These comprise 9 members. At least half of them should be workers themselves. And the representation of women on this committee and in social audit forums is also mandated and guaranteed. And that is something that is, sometimes we think of women's representation in terms of providing numbers, but in fact, this is enabling women to also be influential or have an impact in changing the way the program itself is conducted at the village level. So this is a measure that ensures that how the work is organized, the quality of the work, what happens, there is oversight by a gendered body. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Hania. I think now it's our first break for our Q&A sessions. Thank you so much, first of all, for bringing us all on the same page and setting the scene, as I called it earlier, for like our understanding when we talk about gender, what are we actually talking about? And then also to give us more insights about the public works programs, especially about the MGN Riga program, which I find like very interesting. Maybe as I'm the moderator, I have the first take on a question I might pose. I mean, I know that you are aware of different public works or public employment programs, and I would like to ask you, how do they all have this kind of gender component? Do they what kind of similar components are there that are comparable to MGN Riga? Are they all because you mentioned that it's incorporated in an act, and I mean, often these things need to be incorporated into policies. Could you maybe share some experiences about different approaches? And I think that was actually also one of the questions I see now from one of the participants from the audience. If there are other social protection programs that are designed to primarily promote women, and if yes, like how do they incorporate it into law?
So thank you, Leah, for the question, and Nikos as well. I want to begin by saying that there are 3 different levels at which social protection programs can be made to work for women. And unfortunately, a lot of programs focus on the implementation level, because it's easier to say, we're going to make sure that half of these transfers go to women, or that half of these jobs go to women. So that it's at the very immediate level where you are looking at parity, at gender parity, and it's simple in an almost simplistic way. And there are many programs, especially public works programs, that say this is we're putting half the budget for women, half the budget for men, so that budgeting is a tool that you can use to create this kind of parity, or allocations, or quotas, or so on. But then there are 2 other levels that are more complex. The second is to make sure that you are maximizing the benefit that women can derive from being part of the program. So that the kind of, if you want to call them plus as design features, are women getting the kind of skills development that they need if there is a skills gap? How are you addressing the imbalances that differentiate between men and women, or between even different groups of women? Is your program trying to recalibrate relationships of vulnerability? And here I think perhaps programs that provide reproductive health care services, programs that provide equal opportunity for women and men to as exit strategies, they may be addressing this. But then the third level is not about gender at all. It's about the context itself. So so for example, freedom of information. I think this is one of the most crucial things about MGN Riga, that the state of India, the country, the national forum said, when things go wrong, it's sometimes because there is no equal opportunity to information. Now, the constitutions of many Brazil, India, many countries try to ensure the right to information, the right to transparency, the right to representation. But it's important for social protection programs to incorporate this right and to actually design around this right. So access to information, publicly available records, publicly available evaluations, publicly available documents of all kinds are more important. In my knowledge, I think it's no Arab country provides that, so I can assure you of that. I think MNREGA stands out. Some programs in Brazil, because there is access to information and laws, operate in that way. But I think it's one of the things that is sometimes when we're designing social protection programs, we focus on the micro level, and then the meso and macro level tends to get less attention. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. Otherwise, I think it was Nikos asking the question, has to pose another question about that. Hania, maybe just, are there any, about MNREGA especially, are there any like negative experiences that come out of like the design, the way it is designed, that it maybe neglects here and there?
Yeah, okay, that's, you're right. There are huge differences in the success of MNREGA from one state to the other, and I think this has become a given in social protection literature, that context matters. So if I'm not I don't want to name names, but in some states it's been incredibly successful. There is ownership. It has had not just an impact on poverty, but an impact on gender empowerment, an impact on more than one generation. And in some states, this has just not happened. We could call it corruption. We could call it poor implementation. We could call it, lack of oversight. But ultimately, there is something about the political and social dynamics created by social protection programs that, if not rooted within political relations and context, can, with the best of intentions, still not work. So of course there is variability. There were, for example, problems with the work that was being made available, appropriated by middlemen and contractors, that it was not going to the people it was meant to go to, that there were issues of ethnicity, gender, and but they were overcome. I mean, these issues were, sorry, the sun. These were overcome with the proper critical, politically aware monitoring that enabled or ensured that the design would overcome these features.
And for example, maybe just of curiosity, because I have been working like on the South African public works program as well, and got to know the Ethiopian public works program as well. And I know that it's a lot about like asset creation. And if I'm not mistaken, and maybe you have some more insights about that, like especially in the Ethiopian case, it is that, for example, women can work through the public works program on assets they create on their ground, which obviously could also have some negative impacts of like the perception in the community. Do you have any more insights on that?
There are two things to say about that. Context and markets. So context means with that kind of asset creation, you have to ensure the right to property, protecting the right to property. You have to look at issues of security and safety as they impact women in particular. So, sorry, I just have to move. The sun is shining through. So, I mean, there is that. Sometimes the assets that are created are of poor market value, and so they lose they miss the mark. In Egypt, we had an experience of asset transfers as graduation strategy from public works, where the asset was too expensive for people to maintain, for women in particular to maintain, and where women were selling the asset and then going back into poverty. Because I think that graduation and exit strategy design was not well thought out, and it certainly wasn't a gendered strategy. Mm-hmm. So the asset was unsustainable.
And if you could, like from your experiences, because I know that you have studied public works programs around the world quite intensively, and you have like a huge knowledge about that, because we're going to move to the Egypt impact assessment just now. If you could give some advice to governments on how to design public employment programs that, especially that what you just described, that they are not sustainable. What could they do from your point of view to make it sustainable? What would your advice be? I know it's a kind of a critical question.
Thank you for the confidence, but of course, when as a woman, I'll never say I don't know. But I think one thing. So I'll tell you a little anecdote. In asset transfer and work programs here in Egypt now, there is always a complaint that, people are not enrolling in them because they want to do other things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and I've never understood, well, why not support the other things they want to do? Okay. So mm-hmm. if women don't want to go and dig ditches, but they do want to do hairdressing, why not? Maybe hairdressing is a viable market. Maybe you need to support these women to learn to do hairdressing, transfer an asset of a hairdryer or something, and why not go that route? So there's a kind of, I don't want to call it formalism, or there is almost a dogma about what qualifies as a public works program. And of course, it does come from a literature that public works have to provide a public service, that they go beyond individual interests, and that you don't want the government to be paying for to create interests for private individuals or groups. But I think we need to revisit that kind of notion of public and that understanding of public, and that these programs could be better if they were more locally designed, locally informed, and where the rigor of social protection is in the relations of production, not in the work itself. So the oversight that is created, what sort of that these programs have a lifespan, so they may start as something, become something else. These are political relations and broader relationships rather than the actual nitty-gritty of it's a sheep, it's a cow, it's a bridge, it's a road. I think that kind of being informed is very important. The other thing is to say that, I know that this is something in the West people talk about a lot, but also everywhere, the nature of work is changing. The value of work is changing. So think about the limitations of public works, not only in terms of the welfare that they can create, but also in terms of their viability as work. So it's pointless to put people to work in something that a machine can do, because it's the opposite of dignified.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Hania, for also sharing these personal experiences and examples. And actually, what I think what we can really see is there is not like a one-size-fits-all approach. You really have to dive into the cultural context, pay tribute to that, and really have a proper gender analysis, but also an analysis in general of for the cultural context, what kind of asset creation, or however you design the program. Maybe saying that, we can move to the last part of the webinar. And there we want to move to Egypt, where you are very familiar with because you're staying there and studied there. And you want to share, which I'm very grateful for, because I think it's the first time that it has been shared online in that kind of format, the results of an impact assessment or an impact study that was conducted of the Takaful and Karama program, which is a conditional cash transfer program, if I'm not mistaken. Which actually showed that even the best design of a program somehow can't guarantee the expected results in women empowerment, for example. But before I now go into detail, I'm very happy to hand over to you to provide us with some findings and maybe also some of your analysis why it went wrong.
Okay, thank you, Leah. Now let me just reiterate briefly what I've been trying to say so far is that, you know, work can mean drudgery or dignity. Okay, so what defines whether it's drudgery or dignity is the design features that we've been talking about. So well-designed programs should be not only aware of the constraints on women. Okay, so they need somewhere close to work, they need a crash, they need voice, they need financial tools and security or guarantees, but these programs should also engage with the context in which these constraints operate. So even the most generous or best designed program can fail if the context is overwhelming. Next slide, please. So, findings from an Egyptian CCT program. I am aware that this is not a public works program, but the public works program that we do have has not been evaluated using experimental design the way the CCT program is. And so I found that this finding is particularly relevant to the webinar on gender. So, you know, but because they illustrate the tenacity of gender inequality in the face of social protection's best intentions. So one can really have the best intentions in the world and make an effort, but if gender equality is one of the objectives of a program, then we need to perhaps move to a track that is not just about the individual beneficiary, but about the context in which the beneficiary operates. And very briefly, the Egypt program, it began in 2014, so it's a young program, but it currently serves 2.3 million families with monthly payments. Now, it is estimated, or according to our information. An impact evaluation of the program was conducted by IFPRI, and it found, that's the International Food Policy Research Institute, you know, it's one of the institutes with most experience in doing impact evaluation on cash transfers. And it found that the program had spectacular results in terms of poverty alleviation, in terms of increasing consumption, particularly for children, in terms of impact on child health, anthropometry, and nutrition. So it's quite heartening. It's very reassuring that such a young program, rigorously evaluated in its first phase, would yield significant results. The program, more importantly, was also positively viewed in terms of its procedures, administrative aspects, its targeting. So on the whole, we could say that this is a program that has, by and large, met its objective to the best standard that could be expected, given a variety of conditions. Next slide, please. But this program, and I can say this as one of the people who designed it, was supposed to be a gender-aware program. The money goes to women. It's the first in welfare payments in Egypt, where the money goes to the woman in the family, not even if there is a male. So although we had programs or welfare payments or benefits that went to female-headed households, this is one where even if the household has a male, the money goes to women. Yes, popular and known and established in other parts of the world, Brazil, Mexico, all over the world, but not in Egypt and not in any Arab or Islamic country. And various other features in the design were addressed to address the issue of women's inequality. But the impact of the program on women's empowerment was found to be not negligible, but negative. Now, women's empowerment was measured through a series of 9 questions on decision-making in the household. And the questions included decisions on work-related issues, agriculture, participation in wage labor. Most of the people currently on the program are living in villages, so that was particularly relevant. And it is these work-related decisions that women could not make alone or with a level of authority or autonomy. In fact, because they were on the cash transfers, they had less autonomy to make work-related decisions. So the payments actually negatively impacted their ability to make the decisions that relate to work and even other decisions, but not the ones that relate to their care responsibilities or household responsibilities. So they could decide what to eat, or what to cook, but the issues of mobility and work were negatively impacted by the program. Next slide, please. So why and what should be done? And I want to end my presentation by looking at this finding and using it as a lens for thinking about this and other social protection programs, whether public works or cash transfers or anything else. Because this finding could be explained as a research problem. The questions posed were not suitable. Maybe the index of 9 questions and their answers is not suitable. Maybe they needed one index for work-related decisions and another for home-related decisions. But here again, gender matters, and in compiling this index, I think the research could have been better served if it was informed by the realities of gender inequality in Egyptian villages in particular. It could also be explained by social norms, which delegitimize women's work, so that in fact women on the payments felt that they shouldn't be working in the first place. You know, work means you're so poor that you need to work, and so the payments should not go towards enabling more work. It could be explained by status concerns, where women prefer to claim the homemaker role. So this is a cultural issue, where since the homemaker role is still of higher status, is more privileged, the women use the transfers to attain this higher status. So they're still informed by a culture that devalues or the outside work of women. Could also be political fears that if they admit to work, the transfers will be terminated. If these transfers were understood to be compensation, then people might fear that if they also work, they will lose this compensation and that they have to claim their inability to work. Or it could be economic relief. It could be a good thing. It could mean that these women were engaged in parts of the labor market in types of productive activities that were drudgery, that were awful, that were terrible, and that the payments provided relief. So as I'm saying, evidently some of these possible explanations are good in the sense that they point to a positive welfare outcome of the program, and some are not so good, and that they mean that transfers have not enabled women. To be able to answer this question, we have to understand these women and the context in which they live. Next slide. So indeed, social protection programs can only work if immersed in this context. And it's in the context where poverty is not only experienced, but also where it's created. And therefore, gendering a program needs to happen not only at the design phase, not only at the implementation, not only at oversight, but even when we are trying to understand its impact and analyze how it has affected people's lives. Thank you.
Hania, thank you very much for your analysis and also for elaborating on the findings. We don't have any questions from the audience so far, but I have a question that is also that you can also maybe relate to what we talked about earlier, and that would be like in the Egypt case now, in how far were like women interest groups or civil society actors involved in the design of the program? Maybe that now in the first step, like related to the program in Egypt, but also in general, from your point of view, the necessity of to involve NGOs, civil society, as well as maybe also traditional leaders. I mean, many African countries are operating in a different way still.
So I think the situation in Egypt is as follows: that feminist groups and activist groups have not engaged with social protection issues. And there's a good reason for that. It's because NGOs and civil societies are under a lot of duress, but there is a culture of working in philanthropy / development. So, and these are non-activist groups. These are groups that are community-based. They provide services. And they have been involved in the Egypt program, audit committees at the village level, in reviewing the targeting, in looking at the eligibility, in dealing with grievances. Civil society is fully engaged, but it's not a feminist civil society. It's a service-oriented civil society, and this may be because of a cultural difference between different groups of civil society, where the more activist or engaged are more focused on different other rights, and the issue of poverty or social protection or ground level work with communities is left to the more development oriented or philanthropic. Both, I mean, I know that there's a big difference. So both of these groups of NGOs are more involved in the program than the other civil society organizations that may be looking at structural constraints, at the impact of women on women and so on. But I think the Egypt story is one in the making. I mean, this impact assessment is actually not completely official, and I know that they are trying to do a restudy of the gender impact of the program with more qualitative work and more in-depth work. But I wanted to use these slides to say that even the way we do research on gender and gendering programs needs to be informed by a different set of questions or different methodologies than the way we measure other things.
Okay, thank you
very much
for that.
Yeah, I mean, I realize Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's your turn.
I realize that maybe some of the participants have, you know, heard some of this before, or maybe it's because it's a second webinar. But I'm very happy to take questions or to continue the conversation after the webinar.
I think that that's a brilliant opportunity. Like maybe that we can create like a forum.
Yeah.
I'm gonna that quickly now in my closing remarks, that we can continue the share it then via socialprotection.org. I think that would be great. So yeah, thank you again so much, Hania. I think then there are no other pressing questions from the audience. My closing remarks. I think it was really a great opportunity today to engage on this really important topic, and I believe that it was as informative and useful to it was to me. And for me, it has clearly shown that like a gender-sensitive design of social protections is crucial to the success of programs, and that even if a lot of them are so well intentioned, that there are a lot of traps that you find along the way, and that you have to, through, for example, impact studies, have to see like how you go along, but that you it's on. And I believe that we have some practitioners or also designers of social protection systems with us, amongst us today, and like encouraging them to always have this gender lens and always reflect on the importance of having that. I would like also to remind the participants that we'll get a follow-up email from socialprotection.org with a link to the recording of the session, and then you are free to share it with colleagues, or again if you weren't able to participate. And as Hania just mentioned, you will also receive a link to an online forum where we will be able to take this conversation further offline. And I would like to participants to take part in the evaluation. I think you will receive a link to that. And yeah, it was my big pleasure, Hania, to have you as our expert today, and working with you. And yeah, it was really enlightening for me and for the participants that you shared your insights with us. And yeah, I also want to thank the participants for participating. So I wish you all around the world good day or night, good night wherever you are, good afternoon, and we will read from each other in the forum.
Thank you, and bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.